Norway chess. And we have an incredible battle looking at us here between Gukesh and Arjun Erigaisi, two of the top three players of India and the world, and specifically this newest generation of top Indian teenage talent. And we might also have something of a game here between Fabiano Caruana and Wei Yi. It has not heated up yet, but all the pieces are on the board, and that may be an exciting battle for us as well. Right below me here, there's already been a less epic game between Magnus and Hikaru, which we won't be watching today because they finished in under an hour with a Berlin draw. Yeah. Hope I didn't make you wait too long with that starting soon screen. Hope folks are still ready for this. Where can you learn positional play or strategy in chess? Well, all over the place, Caesar. All over the place. Do you have a rating over 1200 anywhere? Until your rating's 1200, you don't really need to worry about learning positional stuff or strategy. It'll be enough to just learn how to, see which pieces are attacking which pieces, count attackers and defenders, see a skewer or a pin or whatever they call the tactics these days. You are over 1200 already. Okay. Well, in that case, one of the first strategy books that I recommend to people is a book called Winning Chess Strategies. It's by Yasser Sirawan and Jeremy Silman. Winning Chess Strategies. And the other thing I could recommend to you is a very, very short video series that I made on YouTube. And I think it's 4 videos long, and honestly, even just the first video might be a good start for you. It's called What to Do. Having trouble finding it. Hang on. If I can't find it, it'll be hard for you to find it, perhaps. Let's try Chess Dojo. So the only way is from books. You can learn in other ways too, Caesar. How did you imagine you were going to learn? Private lessons with the Grandmaster? There's a link to a video for you. You can also learn just by playing your own games and asking your opponents afterwards about what they thought about the game. As you get better, more and more often there will be relevant strategy in your games instead of just tactics deciding everything. So you will naturally learn strategy without ever studying it, so to speak, just by playing, discussing, and analyzing your games. But you sounded like you wanted a place where you could learn position or strategy. Then I offer you books and videos. And what did you have in mind? How do you learn best? And meanwhile, I'm going to get into these games a little bit because I think that's what a lot of people are going to be here for. It's going to be to discuss these games. Hey, Yolio Yellow. Yes. So, very, very important. I'm a shy person too, by the way, EO. So, very important. How are shy people supposed to find training partners? Because you're correct. Even shy people would benefit from training partners. Very, very important to have a training partner. And you should try to have one even if you're shy. It's not a piece of the training program that I would recommend anybody skip. I think it's a very, very important part of the training program. So there is, as you've already found yourself, so good on you, there is a finding training partners channel in your Discord split up by cohort, right? I think it's split into 500-point groups. So you could go in there and say, hey, this is like my time zone, or this is the time of day when I'm, whoa. Do you guys see down here the move that Wei Yi just made? That looks pretty interesting. Holy moly. You do like books where you can learn a fair amount of strategy and positional play by reading a single book, Caesar. You don't even have to read many books. Just read the one book I told you, the Sirwan and Silman book. And you'll be well on your way. I mean, you'll have to also, use some of the ideas in your game. You can't get better at chess if you completely stop playing, right? But it doesn't sound like you're going to stop playing. So if you're playing chess and you read that one book, that'll do it for you. Yolio. So yeah, so there should be a Discord channel where you can send a message and just say you're looking for one. We're also thinking, and I'm curious, since I'm talking to one of these, a key demographic here, shy people who do want a training partner. I'm curious, if we had a button you could click on your profile saying, just pair me with somebody else who needs a training partner, would you click that button and have the dojo just assign you somebody in your cohort? Let me know what you think of such a feature. Okay, a button would be amazing for you. And basically what would happen is, it would be like when you search for a 3-minute game on chess.com, right? Or a 10-minute game. It would be like you click a button seeking a training partner, and then Dojo would just assign you another person in your cohort who has also clicked the button on their end, obviously. Like they're also looking for a 10-minute game or whatever. That's one of our future feature ideas. It's on the roadmap. All right, let me show you folks how this game started. Hey, Ramila. Welcome to the show. Let me show you how this game started between Gukesh and Arjun, because it started crazy, and Gukesh has already completely tanked his time. He's doing the crazy Gukesh thing with the clock that Jesse is upset about and that I recognize as slightly problematic, but we saw him and Ding doing it in a world championship match, and they still played at a good level. So first of all, Arjun surprises with the Pierce defense. Now, by Arjun standards, it's not like an earth-shattering surprise. Arjun tends to surprise people and play a huge variety of openings. It doesn't mean that Arjun could never surprise us, right? Like if Arjun played F5 on move 1, I think everybody would be surprised. Fair enough? I think people would be really surprised to see him play F5 on move 1, because that would be so bad, it would be beyond the pale, it would be outside of the range of what he normally plays, right? But for Arjun to play a center counter, or an Alyechin, or a Pierce, that's within Arjun's range. Okay, nevertheless, this opening is considered to be slightly subpar. And here, I'll just paste it in chat in both channels since people are curious about the one book for Caesar. This is a perfect first book on strategy for anybody who is new to learning chess strategy. Now, again, my general take is that you should get up to 1200 without studying chess books and chess strategy. You should get up to 1200 simply by somebody telling you to bring out your pieces in the opening and then learning to calculate captures and things like that. And that should do it. Okay? So this is not a book I'm recommending for people under 1200 online. And for Lee chess, that might be 1500 or 1800 or something, right? But once you're decent at seeing which of your pieces are attacked, which of your opponent's pieces are attacked, you've done a bunch of tactical puzzles, which Caesar in their very first question said they've done a bunch of tactical puzzles. Once you've done a bunch of tactical puzzles, and you know what a pin is, you know what a skewer is, you can see some double attacks, you know a certain number of little patterns for getting in and out of attacks. For example, can you see that this bishop has a hidden attack on the c4 pawn that Wei Yi just seemed to sacrifice here? So if white's queen takes on c4, are you aware that black has conceivable moves like knight takes c3 or knight e3, right? Do you have that kind of tactical awareness, right? That queen takes pawn on the diagonal of the bishop, black could look at almost any violent move from the knight, and you need to check those moves before you put your queen on c4. If you have that degree of tactical awareness, you could read a first strategy book. And the first strategy book that I would recommend is Winning Chess Strategies by Silman and Sirawan. If you want an even shorter shortcut, I would suggest to you this extremely easy video series I made on YouTube. You can watch only the first video. Literally, that'll do okay. The first video explains the whole strategic concept to you of what you can do in a position that doesn't have tactics for white or black. The second video, if you want to keep watching, just gives you a model game and explains how it applies on an actual position in an actual game. And the third and fourth videos are both simply tests. They're just 2 videos of quizzes of the material from the first video still. So videos 2 through 4 are just to help you absorb what you studied in video 1. The studying material is a single video. That's it. So that could be very abordable, very accessible for anybody who's a beginner to chess strategy. We've got another quick question here from Marble, good morning to you, Marble, who is about to go play in their first OTB tournament. How exciting. What a wonderful experience, Marble. I hope you have a great time. Maybe meet one other dojoer there so you can feel comfortable at your first event. Make a friend right off the bat. The most important thing, I think, at an OTB chess tournament is to make a friend. The second most important thing, well, these are arguably co-most important things. Make a chess friend and just literally have been to a chess tournament, have been in that scene, that atmosphere, just know what the feeling is. Okay, but they have 2 questions, and almost everybody going to their first OTB tournament has worries of some kind, right? Everybody is worried about something. So, Marble's first worry is, does a mistake in notation mean an automatic forfeit? No. You're allowed to make any number of mistakes. You're supposed to try and write something down, so if you simply refuse to write anything down on your paper, people can complain about it, and it could mean that they would add time to your opponent's clock, and that the tournament director would give you a warning. But even not writing anything down won't get you forfeited. And number 2, they're asking, do most tournament boards have the squares labeled? Often not. Often not, Marble. So it depends. The roll-up vinyl boards that people use in the US at tournaments generally do have squares notated on them, but the wooden boards that are used at nicer tournaments, including European tournaments, generally don't. So just be okay with making some mistakes, I would say. And, don't get too worried about it. Let's have a look at Gukesh and Arjun, okay, folks? So Pierce defense, my understanding, slightly dubious. I don't know what lines modern supercomputers have said are good for white against the Pierce. I haven't looked it up. Yeah, don't spend all your time on it, Take a stab at it, write something down, and then, what you've written down is good enough. Reassess Your Chess is hundreds of points more difficult, Tarek, than the book that I've suggested. The book I've suggested is good for someone around 1200, OTB rating. Right, so I don't know what that is exactly in, Lee Chess and Chess.com. It might be 1300 Chess.com. It might be 1700 Lee Chess, something like that, right? The book I've recommended by Sirawan and Silman, that's for someone in the 1200 to 1400 range OTB. And if you're weaker than that, you simply shouldn't be reading a book yet. You should just be working on your tactics. Okay? And the book you started reading, Reassess Your Chess, that's probably something for players in the 1600 to 2000 range OTB. I think of 1700 as being the sweet spot for starting to read that book. So there you go. But I really am surprised by Gukesh playing bishop c4. I would not have guessed that is one of the computer-approved approaches to the Pruess defense. And maybe I'll just quickly update my computer knowledge, even though, we don't normally use much in the way of engines during our streams. And I don't normally use much in the way of engines in my own training even. But just out of curiosity, oh my god, this supercomputer's gotten even better. It's so good now that it doesn't even think the Pruess defense gives white an advantage. Meaning, the Pruess defense does give white an advantage, by the way, folks. That means this computer engine is so good that it can basically see to the endgame from move 1 when I play the Pruess defense. I mean, that's just crazy. All right. So what does the computer say is a good line for white against the Pruess? Jeez Louise. It thinks the move h4 might even be better than knight f3. That's how crazy times have gotten. It thinks h4 here is a plausible move. And it thinks the best moves, maybe bishop g5, bishop e3, f3, bishop f4, knight e2, all pretty similar. Okay, well, let's go with knight f3, computer, because that's what Gukesh did. I used to think knight f3 was good. I would have guessed that, simple bishop e2, h3, castles, bishop e3. I would have thought that line would be a nice, pleasant edge for white. But the computer engine is saying, even here, white should play bishop g5. What does it think of Gukesh's bishop c4? It says it's a terrible move. Black can castle, which Arjun did. And then Gukesh plays h3, another move the computer is not impressed by. I would have thought here you have to play either queen e2 or bishop b3 to get out of the way of knight e4. But here Gukesh plays h3, one of the slowest possible tempo-losing moves while allowing knight e4. This is the move I saw while walking the dog, and I was just this was like beyond shock that he plays h3, allowing knight takes e4. My supercomputer says knight takes e4 is correct for black and does work, and black is doing great here. So Gukesh's prep. He spent 7 minutes on knight f3? So was he prepped or was he not prepped? For anyone who doesn't know, the point of this knight sack here is what's called the center fork trick. If white takes the piece, black plays d5, the pawn's defended by the queen, and it recovers the piece. That'll be an equal material trade. In other words, white gives as much material as they get, black gives as much material as they get, right? So materially, it's equal. Strategically, what it allows you to do is it allows you to trade off a piece when you've got less space and trade off this pawn for part of white's pawn center. So it reduces black's disadvantage centrally, so to speak, to a totally manageable amount. And now this bishop's well placed and there's some counter pressure here and the position's playable for black. Normally this knight e4 move is thought to be an equalizer. Now, you might be used to the idea that tactics are used to gain an advantage, like to checkmate or to win material or something. But sometimes tactics are a complicated operation with a goal that's not that complicated, right? So here, you play this complicated tactical sequence. At the end of it, the position's equal. It doesn't mean you've won the game or lost the game or anything like that. Good morning, Hobotogo. It must be a setting on your side. I don't think I'm on 2x speed myself. I'm not talking particularly fast. Good morning also to Ash. Welcome. And yeah, I saw the last game with Magnus yesterday. It was Uh, it was an interesting one. It was it was okay. So for anyone who didn't see, yesterday Gukesh won his game. I hesitate to say won. Yesterday Magnus lost his game against Gukesh. Magnus was much better, probably winning. I haven't looked with the computer, folks. Maybe some of you have. Poo poo for you. Um, it looked like it looked like Gukesh started off pretty well, was doing some really interesting stuff, but then actually I think Magnus outcalculated him. If I'm not wrong about this, despite that being Gukesh's strength, I think Gukesh played the strategic part of a Rui Lopez really well, which you would think would be Magnus's strength. Then it got tactical. You would think that's Gukesh's strength, but I believe that Magnus outcalculated him in the tactics, came out in a winning position, and then Magnus made like the worst blunder I've maybe ever seen from him, or it's definitely up there. And he lost an advantageous endgame. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost some of his advantage, like it had slipped, and his advantage wasn't maybe completely winning when he blundered. So maybe he was already feeling the game going against him and getting frustrated. I don't know what was going on. I didn't watch it in real time. I haven't yet looked over the tail of the clocks. I know Jesse is going to be very curious who used their time better or worse and all that, because that's something that he's just been very attuned to recently, because he's working on a new tool to help people think about their own time usage and so forth. So naturally he's thinking about other players' time usage, and Gukesh being the world champion and having very unusual time management, it's an obvious thing to think about when talking about Gukesh, right? As far as I could tell, Magnus at some point there played one of the worst blunders of his entire chess career and then lost the endgame. So that was yesterday's game, which was certainly surprising. And we're in another surprising game here as well today, folks. And in this position, Gukesh played bishop f7 check. Material-wise, it's similar to knight e4, d5, bishop d3. What bishop f7 does is it creates a weirder position. And that is a Gukesh thing, to just get a weird position. Why is this position weirder? Well, he's purposely given up the bishop pair, which creates imbalances, right? And he's also weakened Black's king position a little bit, while leaving their center more intact, right? Whereas if you play knight e4 in this position, Black's structure on the king remains normal and the central balance remains normal, right? One pawn each in the center. So bishop f7 is a further weird move. My supercomputer didn't disapprove of it. It said the position is still equal either way, because this computer is so super that it sees all the way to a draw. Now, from a human perspective, I guess we have to ask ourselves, what do we think of the evaluation from a human perspective? From a human perspective, I don't really like it, unless there's immediately something weird with like knight g5 and h4, h5, but then why did you play h3, right? You knew Black was going to take on e4, you set up for it, you spent your tempo on h3. I don't see a plan for white. I don't see how to get this bishop developed to a good square like e5. I'd say from a human perspective, it's trash. I'm sorry. For anyone out there who's a Gukesh fan like myself, I'm going to close down my supercomputer because I see it's not really helpful or useful at all. To me, it's just too strong, basically. It's just too strong. It's just too strong to be of use. It just sees everything as like equal, so I can't really tell you what I think is like better and worse and so forth. Okay, so we're going to close the supercomputer that was helping me have a quick look at this opening here. Oh, sorry, phone call from the hospital. 1 second. Another up. All right, I'm back. That seemed to be a prank call. Okay. Joao is going to help us figure out what is worse. Because the computer just says all of this is equal. But obviously it's dramatic, the imbalances that are immediately created, right? Black's got a backward e-pawn. Black's got a rook developed onto an open file. Black's got the bishop pair. White's got weak light squares, right? My first human take is it looks bad for white. My first take is it looks bad for white. I just don't see how we do anything. You know, h4, h5 doesn't feel that powerful. In the game, Arjun played c5 on the next move after Gukesh moved the knight. And that's going to get black excited about like fighting in the middle of the board where they've got more center pawns. I just like black's position already. So that's my take. Now, Gukesh thought 12 minutes about knight c3. So he did not trick Arjun into something that he had prepared. I'm going to say he didn't expect the Pruess. So in this position here, he stopped and thought and tried to pick a variation he could play against the Pruess. Like he had nothing in mind for it, and he decided to pick something out of a hat right here. He tried to think, what is Arjun prepared for? What's something I could do that he might not be super prepared for? And he picked something terrible. Anybody who likes Gukesh, bear in mind, I love Gukesh. But he picked something terrible during that 7-minute thing. He picked this. And by this point, he already didn't know anything more about what this was. He thought for over 12 minutes here. So this wasn't like a sideline that he'd prepared recently or that he's played 500 times in blitz games or something like that. It was just, I don't know what. I don't know what it was. And he plays this. Arjun plays the most obvious move. Well, there's maybe more than one obvious move. Arjun plays at least one of the one or two most obvious moves, a super obvious move, and Gukesh then thought for over 20 minutes. So he didn't know what he was doing when he played knight c3. He didn't know what he was doing when Arjun played c5. And, you know, by move 10, he's got a bad position on the board and on the clock with white. I mean, awful. I don't know if I've rarely had a position this bad with white in a tournament game. I don't even know if for sure I ever have. Because I will tell you folks, when I was clicking with my computer and it was saying everything's equal, it did say that after c5, the only move for white was pawn takes pawn. So white's played badly enough that O gives black a huge advantage. The fruits of 20 plus minutes of thought. And I guess I would say, to some extent, it's a sign that the previous moves are bad if the computer thinks white has an only move here. Because a lot of times when the supercomputer is looking at positions, it shows you like 6 different moves that are equal, right? 6 different moves that are equal, 6 different moves that are equal. And if you suddenly have one side only has one candidate move, and the other side has 5 or 6 moves, and then the same side only has one move. That's now a way of detecting with a supercomputer what we used to call a small advantage. Okay? We used to call those positions small advantages because we would say maybe it's much easier to play black's position, or we would say like black's position's advantageous. Now the computer sees one way to defend from here all the way through an endgame and says it's equal. But really, it's not. The computer's just too good. I don't know if I've explained that clearly enough. I do understand it now, so I could try and re-explain it better if I'm not explaining it well. But basically, because the computer is too strong, it no longer shows you a gradation of evaluations. It sees so far ahead to it sees like a defense. But you can still notice sometimes a computer giving one side the leeway of 5 or 6 moves that are equal, and another side has only one move that's equal. That's a new way of detecting with a computer that's too strong which side is better or worse. Honestly, you don't even need to know that because none of you should be working with computer engines. But there it is. So after c5 castles, spending over 20 minutes on that move, Gukesh at that point, it says he also spent 4 minutes on 1e4 today. Man, he must really be struggling with Arjun as an opponent or something. But at this point at move 10, he's used almost half his time for the entire game, and his position's terrible. Normally Gukesh comes to events with a lot of great opening ideas, Butch. And normally after someone's played a World Championship match, the work they've done for the World Championship match spills over and as an advantage for 6 to 12 months to come. Because they've done more opening work than anybody else in preparation for that, and it takes months for them to use up their store of new ideas and for people to catch up with some of their stuff. And if you look at past World Championship matches from the Carlsen area, not only Carlsen, but his opponents always had like an afterglow for 3, 6, 9 months after the Carlsen World Championship matches, because they would have this like dangerous arsenal that they'd prepared for the World Championship match and not used most of it, right? So very notable, very odd for Gukesh to be struggling with some openings and not having fresh ideas right after a World Championship match. It is kind of weird. And Jesse, I think, has been talking about Gukesh using his time badly at this tournament. But I think another thing that's notable is he just hasn't had good positions out of the opening of this tournament, has he? I mean, we could go through his games real quick. His first game against Magnus Carlsen, was he well prepared in this opening? Oh, Magnus played a really weird opening, so neither of them would. Yeah, opening prep was irrelevant. That was a irrelevant to opening prep game. Let's go back here. Let's click on Gukesh. Second round game against Arjun, he did not have good opening prep. Game 3 against Hikaru, not good opening prep. Game 4 against Fabi, nope. Yeah, he just has not had good openings this tournament, I would say, overall. So he's got some kind of problem with his opening prep at this tournament as well. And, these things kind of come together in a certain sense. Time trouble and opening prep, right? If you're well prepared in the opening, it puts pressure on your opponent and they have to spend time catching up with what you've already prepped at home, right? Like his game against Arjun was a good example of that, where it wasn't necessarily that Gukesh was so badly prepped. Arjun was so well prepped that he was able to put Gukesh under the gun, right? And so Gukesh had to spend a ton of time trying to catch up with the time Arjun had already spent with a supercomputer at home. So that was the reason for Gukesh's time pressure against Arjun 5 rounds ago, largely, was that Arjun had better opening prep than him, right? If you are unprepared in the opening game after game against really strong players where you should fear getting a bad position, you are going to get into time trouble. You're either going to bite the bullet and play some instinctive moves and hope that your instincts hold up and they're just reasonable moves and your position's playable, or you're going to burn a bunch of time and be low on time. So I think part of Gukesh's problem at this tournament may well be opening prep. That said, we say Gukesh's problem. He does have a 50% score after the lucky win against Magnus yesterday, right? He's got 2 losses and 2 wins, and he stabilized his rating for the moment until he loses another game to his nemesis Arjun. And as somebody mentioned, Arjun has a 6-0 record against Gukesh. He is a very problem opponent for Gukesh. Chat asked, do I personally have a nemesis opponent, somebody with like a crazy good score against me? And the answer is no. I don't. There isn't somebody with a style that I've played repeatedly who just beats mine, nor somebody who I lost a game or two against and then got intimidated and just kept losing against. I have had opponents who were tough for me. I think the most obvious would be Vinay Bhatt, somebody I've played a lot of times. He's a junior, 3 years younger than me. He was like a master when I was getting started because he was a child prodigy and I only started playing in my teen years. So I played him several times because at some point I got good enough that I would get to play with him, but he was always higher rated than me. So I did lose games to him, but it is reasonable because he was always higher rated than me and better than me, both better than me and higher rated than me. So I'd lose games to him, but it never turned into a nemesis thing because I was never worried or intimidated, and I did occasionally win games back against him. So I think my score against Vinay is approximately reflective of the correlation of our forces, like if he was on average rated 125 points higher than me, I was probably expected to score something like 30% against him, and I probably did. Or maybe I was expected to score 33% or something like that, and I probably did. So I don't have any particular opponent that I just always lost against. Anyone I've played a bunch of times, I have some wins against. Yeah. Am I the nemesis opponent of anyone else? I don't know, Michael W. I mean, I can think of one person who I have like an incredible score against, but they are rated like 200 points lower than me. Or I think they were always 100 to 200 points lower than me. So again, it sort of would make sense for me to beat them. But I do think I have 8 wins and 1 draw against them, which is probably a little bit better than it should be. But the fact that they did eventually draw that game against me, and I feel like they played normal and tough against me, I don't know. I don't know if anyone would consider me their nemesis opponent. I don't know. Hey, Pizza Racer. Okay. C84, knight d4, knight c6. Another thing to remember, folks, is that very few normal people play the same opponent a million times the way the top 10 players in the world do, right? The top 10 players in the world end up in a situation where they only play each other, or 90% play against each other in top tournaments again and again and again, right? So somebody like Arjun and Gukesh, they might end up playing 100 classical games against each other over the course of their lives, or more realistically, 30 or 40, right? But there's basically nobody I've played 30 or 40 games against, right? Do any of you have somebody you've played 30 or 40 games against? Probably very few of us have even one opponent where you have enough games where you could say who's the nemesis or not, I think. So yes, Merles, this tournament has been more fighting than your average 2700 plus level tournament. Part of it is you've got Gukesh and Arjun at this tournament who just don't, you know in advance there's no point trying to make a draw with them, right? Or trying to play a short game against them. Today, Magnus and Hikaru were paired against each other, and the old guys immediately gave themselves a rest day to try and keep up with the young ones. But yeah, Gukesh and Arjun are have some of the highest draw contempt of any top players around. So there's only 6 players. You put 2 of them in there. When they're not playing each other, 2 people know they're going to have to play with them full-on games, right? So I think a lot of the credit goes strictly to this pair right here for making it such a good tournament. Fabi's been fighting pretty well at this tournament as well. I think Wei would be trying to fight, but he's kind of the weakest player in the tournament, so some limitations on how well you can fight when the other 5 players are better than you. Exactly, Skivix. There are some, if you go to a chess club, you'll have somebody you play like twice a year. And when I was 1700, there were a couple people that I played maybe 3 times. But honestly, 3 times, it's not enough to know if you're a nemesis or not to me. Yeah, Wei Yi's games look sweet, yes. But the opponents here are a little bit better than him. All right, so Gukesh castled here. Black takes. Now, Gukesh was supposed to take here. This is one thing we know from my supercomputer. He should have taken like this, attacking d5. And if black plays d4, knight e4 looks obviously fine for white. So, maybe e6. You castle. Now black has to catch this pawn at some point. I do think like this d takes c5 move looks super obvious, and that could be the bias of having seen the computer, right? Which is one of the reasons you want to be very careful when you look at a computer, because you're going to be biased and you won't be able to take it back, once you've seen what a computer says. But to me, this looks like really clean and clear. Like you got to just put that pressure there, isolate these 2 pawns from the others with that tempo threat on d5, see what square black's going to give your knights in the middle of the board. Just start fighting. He castles, and after cd4, knight d4, knight c6, here he's going to lose tempo. He can't play knight takes d4, b takes c6, strengthening this pawn, and then nothing can stop black's center. So instead of, when you play d c5, you've got a tempo on black that they have to defend their pawn. But instead, by castling, black gets a tempo on white having to retreat the knight. Right? So now he retreats. Erigaisi presses. We see Erigaisi spending a little bit of time now. d4, knight e4, queen d5. Challenging that square. You can find all the moves when you've got the bar on. Rook e1, h6, and he tries to chip one of the pawns out of black's center, right? He's anticipating a position like e5, cd, ed, something like that. This position's just bad for white. This passed d-pawn is very strong. The bishop pair is great. Oh my god, it's a bad position for white. It is really bad over here. All right. So with that, we've kind of gotten into the Gukesh and Arjun game, right? Gukesh, terrible opening choice, bad time management already, we can say both. At least the last 3 or 4 moves, he played a few moves a little bit faster, but oof. He's in for a brutal game here. At least he's in good recent practice with saving bad positions, right? He's had so many bad positions at this tournament that he is not going to be depressed, particularly about another bad position. This is just his everyday for him, right? His quotidien. Just every day, it's just trying to save god-awful positions that make his fans puke. And yeah, and not just yesterday's ski beaks. There were a couple other lost positions that he drew and saved this tournament. He was more or less busted against Fabi. Saved that game. I mean, he was just down a pawn the entire game with white. Gukesh's score versus the positions that he's had is actually completely amazing at this tournament. Yeah, just completely amazing. He was losing to Fabi and to Wei Yi and to Magnus, I would say. The last 3 games in a row where he got 2 draws and a win, I think he was losing or basically lost all 3 games. Borderline lost, clearly worse, should lose most of the time. Incredible. Incredible to get 2 draws and a win out of 3 lost positions in a row. So I think Gukesh, he'll just plod along here. Unless he's specifically terrified of Arjun. If he's specifically terrified of Arjun, he might play a little bit worse than normal. I don't know. But in general, he should be okay here. By the way, here's a little variation that Arjun could consider, folks. Bishop here, knight here, bishop takes h3. The point is that after pawn takes, you can take here, and your d4 pawn is still protected. Even though we didn't have time to play e5, we don't get a great structure, but we do get a pawn up position, right? So I don't think black can play bishop h6 because we can take on f2. I wasn't 100% sure about knight d4, rook e7. So that's why I played bishop d4, folks. This is not like GM level analysis you're getting here at the moment. It's not even IM level analysis. But just to show you one sample variation that says that Erigaisi could already basically win a pawn, I think. And, e5 was the more obvious move that I suggested first. But bishop f5, I mean, you're attacking the knight. Where's it going? Right? I mean, don't tell me the plan is to go knight d2. No, that can't be. Pawn takes pawn, opening up the bishop and also winning pawns. So knight here, bishop takes, and now one little trick, folks. You can't trade the knight first and then take this bishop for many reasons, okay? For many reasons. The first reason numero uno is going to be this mate in uno, okay? So as far as I can tell, bishop takes h3 is a rather simple calculation. And if white took here, then black has bishop g2 and bishop g4. Okay. Let's just say Pruess is going to be a little bit lazy about calculating because he wants to go see the Fabian and Wei Yi position as well. If I weren't going to be so lazy, I would calculate bishop takes, king takes, knight takes in greater detail, right? And there's rook f8 as well after, say, rook e3. And maybe the calculation's even simple. Maybe we shouldn't even call it difficult. But I'm just going to put this move on the board for you anyway, folks, and just be lame. You can see that the d-pawn is dead. It's condemned. Do you see that? It's just over. I didn't sack anything. Material's equal. I'm threatening to win a pawn on f3 and to win a pawn on d4. Okay? We do not need to calculate nothing more, which is what old people like. They like to be done with the calculation variation as soon as possible. You know? Signing in on another device. I will allow it. I will allow it, Zoom. Okay. So, I think, honestly, I didn't calculate very hard there, but I would say that I've more or less just proved that Arjun could already win a pawn here. That's how bad Gukesh's position is. He can force the win of a pawn, and honestly, it's not a very bad pawn. It looks like like a 90% chance that black's already winning this game, folks. So I'm going to go adjust that sensei eval bar. We're going to call it minus 1.15. You're welcome to be proud of that, Joao. It seems like a pretty good line, right? And I didn't find anything wrong with it either. So that's going to be the basis of the brutal sensei eval bar here, as we're basically still coming out of the opening, right? I mean, Gukesh and Arjun still have two undeveloped pieces on the queen side, right? So we're going to say they're still just coming out of the opening, and already Gukesh is more or less lost. More or less lost by Super GM standards. He's like on that cliff. Okay, I'm not going to say he's lost. He's on that cliff's edge, right? He's got his feet half on the cliff and half out over the abyss. And he's not sure if he's lost his balance or not. He's like doing like this, and he doesn't know if he's about to pitch off or stay on the edge. All right, let's take a quick look at the other guys here. Partly because it just pains me to see Gukesh in this situation. Partly because that position looks interesting too. I will say, although I'm a fan of Arjun's, I'm a fan of Prog's, I'm a fan of most of the top players in the world, Um, Gukesh has that extra little spot in my heart where, you know, even if I like Arjun, I don't want to see Gukesh lose to him. All right, let's check out the Fabi versus Wei Yi game. So in this position here, Fabi playing like a formless central structure, very fluid, trying to create a longer, more positional game. And Wei Yi says, let's resolve some things, right? He plays this explosive c4 move. Fabi took. Knight b6 to c4 is going to recover that pawn. It wasn't really a sack. Why what, though, Dhruv? This looks quite good for Wei Yi. Kind of a typical combination for a Grunfeld player to find. And I think Wei Yi does play the Grunfeld among other things. But c4, yeah, just sort of explosion, emphasizing the activity of his pieces. And Wei Yi is somebody who's very good at cutting through the mess and seeing how you can just activate all your pieces, which is a piece of positional chess, is getting all your pieces active. So he does this, grabs the bishop pair, leaves his c-pawn hanging forever. Oh, yeah, he's just pressing everything. The problem is if you trade all the queenside pawns, Wei Yi, then you can't play for an advantage. You do have the bishop pair. If he had wanted to play for an advantage this game, he could have played rook c8 or bishop d5. I almost feel like Wei Yi sold his position slightly short here with a5, a4. These feel like moves playing for equality. Basically, he's going to try and trade off all 4 pawns on the queen side. You guys see why I say that? Oh, why do I like Gukesh even more than other people, Dhruv? I don't know. Maybe because he's so cute? Maybe because he loves chess so much? Maybe I get like a feeling from him that he loves chess even more than other people, and I love chess, and I love other people who love chess. Have you seen the clip, Dhruv, of Gukesh as like an 11 or 12, like maybe 11 years old, where he says like that he might want to try to be world champion one day? Have you seen that clip? He's so cute. He's so cute. Oh my God. If you haven't seen it, you should go look at it. It's just adorable. You worked at ChessBase India then, so of course you've seen it. Yeah. Well, so I think that clip is like, it's not just that there's one video clip that I like Gukesh, obviously, but I think that clip encapsulates to some extent, right? What, you know, it's a good example of what I love about him. He's so sweet and honest and direct, you know, kind of innocent. I don't know. I think he's just a wonderful, wonderful person. All right, so what's happening here to Wei Yi? He plays rook c8 on this pawn he's been sacrificing for many moons. Fabi plays knight c4, which was prepared by putting the rook on d1. That blocks the rook from his queen, threatens this queen. Black's going to have to save the queen. Trades on b3 first, hitting the pawn, sure. Takes back. And now he's going to have to move his queen away from the rook. I guess he wants to go somewhere like c5, and then when the bishop retreats, trade everything on c4 with a draw, right? Yeah, okay. Clear enough, I guess, right? So we go something like queen c5, let's say. This bishop's attacked twice. It's got to go somewhere. The question is bishop d7, I guess, right? But if the bishop retreated somewhere normal, then you would go trades, takes, and agree to a draw, right? So, but I think there's a problem with this move, bishop d7, right? It attacks your rook. It trades this bishop, and you can't get rid of the knight and pawn yet. So Wei Yi has just played something else. He played queen c3. So now I think you probably get a queen trade and then maybe like bishop d5 or something. You could play bishop e4, but then black trades on c2 and then trades on c4. That's that dead draw, opposite colored bishops. Fabi plays quickly, trades, and then bishop d5, right? Or bishop d7. Oh, bishop d7, there's bishop c4. So that move's a mistake. Look at this trick. That wins back the pawn, right? Equalizes out the game. That's a draw. So bishop c3, I think he's going to go bishop d5. He has. And now Wei Yi's down a pawn. What the heck was he doing? Bishop takes, rook b8, rook b1 or something? Bishop h3. That's going to force bishop g2 for sure. Then he's going to go back to e6. He's going to try and win the pawn back immediately. But white's got moves. White has some moves available. Maybe Wei's calculated them out. He is an insane calculator. Yep, this is one of the moves that I was looking at for white. Knight b6. I also looked at rook d3, rook c1. Seemed like also candidate moves, but my instinct was that knight b6 would be something. So now let's say it goes rook b8. Then we want to play knight d5. Trying to stay up a pawn, you know? Stay up. Gotta stay up a pawn. Has anything happened between Gukesh and Arjun? No. This is the kind of position where Arjun thinks quite a lot. Arjun does that, by the way, folks. He's often a quick player, but he also stops and thinks really hard sometimes on key moments, then plays a long sequence of moves quickly. It's a way that he puts extra pressure on his opponents. So here, if he can successfully come up with, you know, a several move variation, especially a variation with some detail in it that Gukesh isn't predicting himself, he can put huge clock pressure on Gukesh by uncorking a series of moves. So that's what Arjun's working on over there, folks. Give him proper credit. Understand just how dangerous this guy is, and he's unleashing one of his Arjun techniques right here. I feel like Gukesh is somebody who's pretty good at thinking and calculating on his opponent's time. He's not one of those older, lazy players who needs to rest up while the opponent's thinking. So we'll see if he can keep up with Arjun. He's got to do it on Arjun's time here, you understand? Like, he has to stay just as focused and work just as hard while Arjun's thinking as while he's thinking. He has to use not just his time, but Arjun's time as well. And he's got to stay as focused and look just as far as Arjun does, so that when Arjun starts playing quickly, he can also respond reasonably quickly instead of sinking into a deep think to figure out what Arjun has cooked up. Knight b6. Okay, so let's have a look, Wei Yi here. So like rook b8 is the obvious move. Then one option is knight d7. Bishop takes. Rook takes, e6. Rook b1. Rook b6. Rook d3. And black has to play the endgame down a pawn. Right? They can't save it there. Knight d7. Other options? I mean, I guess if you're going to be down a pawn, you might think you want it just on one side of the board, right? Like here, it's just one side of the board. But to me, this looks very dangerous because white can play e3, shielding f2, and they can put their bishop on d5, and you can attack this f7 pawn with one more piece than black can defend it with. This looks, to me, probably lost. And this other one looks to me like probably holding, but a lot of work. I could have that completely flipped around and backwards, or, you know, one of them right, one of them wrong. But this endgame here, yeah, it feels like black can use the opposite colored bishops to contain the passed pawn and still defend the king side and avoid a second weakness. Whereas trading off pawns, which is normally what you want to do when you're on the defensive in an endgame, right? You normally want to trade off pawns. Here it looks like f7 is just basically an indefensible weakness to me. Therefore, you'd be lost eventually. You just get crushed on one side of the board. Knight b6, we've got a move from Wei. He's played rook b8. Now, knight d5 is also a candidate move for white here. It could play pretty similarly to what I was just showing you, right? Like it could lead to this position. Pretty similar to one of the two knight d7 positions I just showed. And at this point, no one in chat's shouting at me that I'm missing an obvious tactic, so I'm going to go out on a limb and make some comments about the play here, the story, the big story between Fabi and Wei. Wei Yi had no reason to go down a pawn. I think he's down a pawn at this point, right? I think he's down a pawn at this point. And he had no reason to be down a pawn. I thought that he could even try to be better in this position here with the bishop pair. He could put a rook on c8. He could put his bishop on d5. I don't understand why you would sack a pawn to try to get a draw when you could just play good moves. So to me, this is crazy the way Wei chose to play this position. Now, bear in mind, I could be missing lots of things, folks, right? But that's, given my limitations. Oh, we've got a move from Arjun. What was it? D3. 26 minutes, and he hits him from another direction. D3. Wow. I knew it was possible, but I hadn't yet considered any details or variations around it. We're going to get to that in just a second, folks. So to me, Wei Yi is simply risking, and he's forcing himself to play, a 50-move endgame with Fabi down a pawn. I think I don't understand the choice. It looks like he's given himself a world of hurt, and so we'll be seeing this game for a while. It looks like Fabi chose knight d7 here versus knight d5. I think they might have been similar, but yeah, the endgame's probably still technically defensible for Wei Yi, but there's no reason to suffer this hard and this bad. It is truly, I think, a lot of work to defend an endgame like this. One here, this could be a possible position they might have in another 3 or 4 moves. If they get to some endgame like this is going to be a lot of work for Wei Yi. So I do not condone or understand the choice to move the game in this direction by him. All right. DeCero's asking another thing. Can I explain why Magnus immediately went for a draw against Hikaru? Why did he play such a lame opening as white and such a short game? I don't know for sure, DeCero. But my first guess would be that he's old and tired and wanted a draw to recover some energy for his games on the next days. Yeah. But nobody other than Magnus could really explain to you why he did it, right? Because first of all, you need somebody to understand very well what happened to Magnus yesterday against Gukesh, right? Because what led to Magnus's blunder, only Magnus really knows inside of him, like how that blunder came, where it came from. Only Magnus really knows how he feels inside, whether he feels strong or weak or whatever. Only Magnus knows what was going on with that blunder and how he feels about it and what his confidence is for the next rounds, etc. But my guess would be that blunder is a sign of, some kind of problem or weakening for Magnus. I've basically never seen him make mistakes. He historically has always tried to play really, really long games against everybody. And I've never seen him get tired and blunder, basically, like ever. And this is like a my level blunder, not a Magnus level blunder. I know Magnus must sometimes play moves that he considers blunders because he has such a high standard. Like, he might be in a position that looks to me like a very difficult rook and pawn ending, and there's one drawing move and one winning move, and maybe every now and then he doesn't find the right move, and he might consider that a blunder. But to me, that's just a very difficult decision that one doesn't always get right. But what he did yesterday was a blunder. The only person who can really tell you why he went for a draw today would be Magnus, who could tell you, if he wanted to be public about it, how he currently feels about his form and his strengths and weaknesses and his energy and so forth. But the best outside guess, I think, would be that Magnus played a quick draw today because he needed rest. Because that's the obvious advantage of a quick draw with Hikaru, right? Is that you get rest. So maybe he felt fatigued yesterday. Maybe he felt like fatigue was related to the blunder yesterday. Maybe he thought he needed some rest. They might also have a rest day tomorrow, for all I know. They probably do, which would make turning today into a rest day weird as well, right? But that's my best guessing. Maybe you find maybe somebody else has a better guess than me. By the way, look at this, folks. Wei Yi, he's playing this in seconds here. He doesn't trade pawns with rook b3, rook e7. So I think we score 1 for David on that one, right? e6, keeping the pawn structure intact. And now we get rook and bishop. Opposite colors. Endgame. It's going to be a dour defense for Wei Yi, I think. I think this is going to be a game here. And so let's switch to the other board maybe and talk about d3. Skibix, I think Fabio is fine to trade one rook. And, since black can challenge these open files, I don't know that you've got a very good option to avoid one rook trade. Like, I guess, you do something like this, this construction is going to fall apart, and you're going to start losing material as white. Yes, if he didn't want to play bishop b7, he could have played like maybe this rook b1 move. And that leaves him more freedom against rook d8 to go somewhere else with his rook. But again, you can only avoid a rook trade for so long. If the opponent really wants to trade one rook, I don't know. I think it's not such a big deal, and it's realistic that with all these open files, one rook was going to get traded. He definitely does not want to trade the last rook, right? So that I think we all know. He needs to keep one rook on the board. He needs to keep this pawn defended and advance it anytime he can. Anytime this pawn can advance, it will. And then he's going to have to try and come up with a second weakness on the king side eventually. Right? But any chance he has to move the pawn a little bit further forward is going to put the black pieces, it's going to make them more tied down to defending that passed pawn queening, which gives him more latitude to poke on the king side. Let's have a look at this crazy one though, right? D3 was played by Arjun after long thought, and in 1 second, Gukesh played rook e3. So, did Gukesh do the job that I said he needed to do? When Arjun was thinking for 26 minutes, did he sip some tea and take a break? Did he walk around the room and think about a poem he's been writing? No! He spent 26 minutes, just like Arjun, thinking about the position as hard as he could. That was the brief, and Gukesh has successfully done it. Rook e3, bishop f5, knight g3, quickly as well. Planned it. Rook d8. You see how fast Arjun's playing? You had to be ready for that, and Gukesh was. Another move instantly. Bishop d2. e5. And now finally he's thinking. But do you see how fast Arjun's moves came after d3? Right? He had all these decisions made ahead of time. You know, he calculated all kinds of moves before playing d3. He calculated bishop e3, rook e3, you know, probably queen b3. He calculated all those moves for Gukesh and planned his responses to them. You see? So then when Gukesh plays his move, he can play a move quickly, and then he can play a move quickly. Right? So he already made the choice about whether or not to give Gukesh the option to break up the bishop pair. Do you see? He made that choice in advance so he could play quickly and put more pressure on his opponent. That's classic Arjun. And if Gukesh had just been resting during those 26 minutes, he would now need 26 minutes of his time to catch up with what Arjun was planning. You see what I mean? Or if he played faster than 26 minutes, he would be playing with less judgment and less calculation than what Arjun had put into his idea, right? So it would be both risky after d3 to think for 26 minutes when you've got, I think he had like 52 minutes at that point. It'd be risky to think for half of your time for white here. It would also be risky to play a move in 3 minutes when your opponent thought for 26. Okay, so both of them doing a very good job here. Jesse's going to excoriate their time usage probably at some point, and I am here to tell you I approve of what they've just done, at least in that sequence there. They both worked really hard during this d3 think. I think bishop takes h3 was borderline winning as well. This move looks quite good for black. Someone says, I do not understand d3. Okay. Well, d3, the idea is to get an advanced pass pawn, cramping white's camp. What's really risky about it, so to speak, is in a middle game, a pawn this far ahead can get, isolated, encircled. You know, it can be hard to properly defend it because it's so far into the other camp, and it can get encircled and attacked and so forth, right? So it's a risky and double-edged decision. Also, by pushing the pawn, he leaves white with a solid structure against this bishop. But I guess like the main idea is, since you're not going to queen the pawn with all these white pieces here, the point is you're going to cramp white with the pawn, right? It's kind of like gaining space in the center. That's how I would, at the most basic level, conceive of d3. Does that work, Skibix? It's more complicated than that because it is also a bunch of other trade-offs and some ideas of in what endgames would the pawn be good on d3 or would be weak on d3, and you have to calculate a bunch about getting encircled, and he has to be okay with giving up the bishop pair as part of the move. But the basic idea of d3 is to cramp white with this pawn. And he definitely wants to be able to follow up with e5, e4, because that would both support the pawn and further cramp white. Right? And a single pawn could cramp white some, but a pair of pawns is going to cramp white more. If you're going to cramp your opponent, you want to really cramp them, not just like a little cramp them. Yeah? Bishop d2, e5. So the critical thing is for him to get this pawn to e4. Once he does, this knight's going to get kicked away, and he's going to have the idea of maybe knight e5, knight c4 to bust the blockade. So if it were black's move here and not white's, white would probably be in dire trouble. Do you guys want to see how bad it would be, just so we can, so we can just calibrate? I'll play king h2, so I don't hang h3, but just like basically a waiting move. Like, well, I can't play rook b1 because of the queen a2. Notice the cramp. Okay, so let's play e4 for black. So this knight gets pushed. This pawn's still defended. E1 and G1 look like pretty bad squares for the knight, so we'd be tempted to try and go here. Black doesn't even necessarily need this rook here. They could overprotect the e-pawn now. Idea to retreat the bishop and then play g5, winning this knight. And if white trades, then there's this threat always. Plus the e-pawn's super well defended by that. So now, is there any move that would stop f4? Only retreating the rook back here. Bishop e5. So now you could take this slowly for black. Or you could take it quickly. Sorry, my brain finally calculated a weird move. E3. If pawn takes e3, you play bishop takes knight. And if bishop or rook takes, we want to play f4, winning a piece. This move might win, in which case we wouldn't have a lot more to talk about here. This is an example of taking it quickly. Taking it slow would be you like retreat the bishop so that your rook defends this, and you're threatening f4, and you're threatening knight e5, knight c4. And I think you could slowly crush white with this position. I don't think this position is defensible, actually. I think this is a decisive advantage for black if you play it slowly. I also think it might be a defensive... I also think it might be a winning advantage decisive if we take it fast, right? Here, f4, winning material, rook takes. Knight takes is decent. Queen e5 to e2 also makes sense. Let's go knight takes. This piece has to go somewhere. Let's go maybe rook g7. Threatening queen g2. Threatening maybe knight f3. Some winning. Another example of playing fast is you go like f4, knight e4, f3 at some point. That's another kind of thing that you can look at, is at some point you sack one of your pawns to disrupt their king because they've been cramped up and their pieces aren't as good as yours, right? So then pawn takes, rook takes, king here, queen d7. Does white have a defense to this stupid line of mine? Looks like he just accidentally checkmated white. Let's, and here I don't yet have this knight f6 trick because the rook is still here and the rook takes. After pawn takes, rook check. We can't play knight f6 because we're in check. Move the king, queen here. Now knight f6, there's bishop f6. It's over. Okay, so as far as I can tell in this position, I can win as black by playing bishop c7 and waiting. I can win by black with a tactic e3. And I can win by black with an f4, f3, just tearing open the king side. So black's advantage is ultra decisive there. Does that make sense? We're just calibrating. That's how much black's threatening right now with e4. e4 completely rolls over white. So, what is Gukesh to do about it? The first move I thought of was queen e1, fighting for control of e4. The move queen b3 might also fight for control of e4, and seems maybe even more desirable. Knight e1. So he's going to allow e4. It's over. I'm going to drop his evaluation further, folks. Is he allowing e4 though? Oh, is there something to calculate, Merles? What would be the plan against e4? I was thinking maybe he's planning to fight back with f3, and I just don't believe in f3. So, like, f3 is playable, but you'll eventually lose because you weaken your king. That was as far as I looked at. You think f3 maybe? Yeah. Okay. That much had occurred to me. White might play f3, and black's pawn structure will get broken up. But that doesn't save white at all from being lost. I mean, you're Merles. Tell me, does bishop takes h3 win? You should be able to calculate a win here faster than me. Does bishop takes h3 do it? How's bishop e5 here? How's queen d6? How's queen c5? Which of these moves is winning? You tell me. Hey, Chess Gone Mad. Now, I will say this. If white doesn't play f3, then a player without much skill can win as black, right? Like, I could win this game if white doesn't play f3. You just give me a few more moves, right? To bring this bishop to this diagonal and or this diagonal, right? Just limiting white's options by threats against the king. You give me time to play knight e5. Even I will win it. Like, it'll become so overwhelming that I don't need to be able to calculate as well as Gukesh to win the position. The position will just win, right? So probably the idea is to play f3 and probably f3, but f3 also loses, you know. It's just more fighting. It's just more fighting. Now is f3, now does black even have to hurry to play e4? Maybe not. What's white threatening? Knight f5, gf5, rook d3. Yeah, okay, maybe you got to do it. Merles will give us some kind of cool tactic for black in a moment about this e4 f3 position. This position is dead. The thing is, black doesn't even necessarily need to do a tactic. You know, they can just, whatever, make some trades here and the position's good for black. What would be the issue? Pawn takes, knight f5 to take this pawn. There's always f2 check, right? This at least stops knight e5. Yeah. I mean, these positions are basically winning for black, but it still requires skill. That's the difference. Yeah, I was thinking he might play queen b3 last move, Merles, which would be pretty similar. But queen b3 here threatens the queen, and basically we don't even allow e4, right? We still have control of that square for the moment. I really thought he was going to play queen b3 here. But I hadn't looked deeply, you know, and Arjun may have had something evil planned against queen b3 that I hadn't yet taken into account. Knight e1, e4 played by Arjun pretty quickly, you see? 3 minutes. I mean, he knows it's right. He knows he's got to do it. Okay. I think this, unfortunately, is where I have to leave our coverage for today. I know it's thrilling. I know it's fun. It'd be nice to do another hour. But I gotta take the kids from school to a doctor's appointment. Yeah, I would say the chances of Arjun winning this game, Merles, are probably somewhere between 75 and 90%. Something like that. There's definitely a chance for Gukesh to save it. You know, it's not yet minus 20 or just, you know, a simple position where Arjun is infallible or something like that. It's still something where there's skill involved. Like if you tagged me in as black here, I couldn't yet win the game, for example. Right? I mean, I would try, but you know, I'm pretty confident I wouldn't win it yet. Anytime like this is something that I can use as like to help me like figure out when a game is going to be won or not at this kind of level, folks, is like when I know that I could tag in and win the game, then I know that the GM is going to win it. You know what I mean? Like if the position's so good, without computer evaluations or anything, but just like looking at it, I'm like, this position I could win against, well, it used to always be I could win against Magnus, but now let's say, you know, this position I could win against, you know, Arjun or Gukesh or whoever. When you look at the position with your own eyes and you say, I could win this against any human, then basically you know that Arjun's going to convert it, right? So then you can already call the result. You can say, maybe there's still some fight left, but this guy's going to win this game. And you can walk away and be right. Here, I couldn't yet win it, so there's still some battle to it. But I think it's more likely he'll win than not. And if Gukesh survives this, that's going to be he'll continue one of the longest streaks ever of luckiest, of incredible, let's not call it luck, because it's partly his skill set. It would be one of the longest strings of escapes in chess history. You seldom have a player as good as Gukesh get this many bad positions in a row, folks. Right? As I'm recapping. The last 3 rounds in a row against Fabi, Wei Yi, and Magnus Carlsen. I think he was losing in all 3 games. And all 3 of them he saved. Right? So Magnus was a different kind of world champion. He was famous for things like a 120 game streak without losing a game. For Gukesh, it's going to be like number of games where you were dead lost and didn't lose. It's going to be his personally amazing streak. So if he saves this game here against Arjun, I will add it to that streak because he's definitely already dead here by, supercomputer standards. So yeah, what he's doing from these bad positions is there's no other comparison out there. I've never seen anyone else do this at this kind of a level. Obviously, if you're 1600 playing against other 1600s in your club, there are 1600s who bamboozle other 1600s, Like at my chess club, there was a guy who would play like A6, H6 as black on the first 2 moves. And that guy got a lot of terrible positions, and therefore he was very good at saving terrible positions, And so he would turn around positions like this against other 1600s. But Gukesh, did you hear the opponents? Fabi, Magnus. I mean, there's nobody who's turned around lost positions like this against guys like that ever before in chess history. All right, so anyone who wants to follow along the game further, I'm going to drop some links before I drop off here. I wish everybody a great day, and I look forward to seeing the conclusion of these games myself. Exactly, Merles. I talked about that earlier today, that it's like very weird that he's getting bad positions out of the opening right after a world championship match. Very, very weird. All right, let's raid Chess 24 maybe? No, let's raid Naroditsky and Hess. Yeah. I assume that Naroditsky and Hess's commentary is going to be better than the official commentary, folks. That's why I'm sending you there. I'll just be very blunt about it. You don't have to clip that and send it to the wrong person or anything, but that's my rationale. So enjoy. I think that should be good.